It begins with a number, 200,000, and a secret that has never been told. On the evening of November 24, 1971, a man in a black raincoat boards a short flight from Portland to Seattle. He orders a drink, chats politely with a flight attendant, and then casually hands her a note. The note says he has a bomb. He demands $200,000 in cash and 4 parachutes. The plane lands, the money is delivered. The parachutes are brought on board. Then the plane takes off again, climbs into the dark November sky, and somewhere over the wild, tree-covered mountains of southwest Washington, the man opens the rear door, steps into the freezing wind, and disappears. He is never seen again. Not by police, not by the FBI, not by anyone. He becomes the only unsolved hijacking in the history of commercial aviation. And the strange part, the part that keeps people asking questions half a century later, is that when a small portion of that money finally surfaced, it only deepened the mystery. The man who called himself Dan Cooper walked into Portland International Airport on the afternoon of November 24, 1971. It was the day before Thanksgiving. Families were traveling. The terminal was busy. Cooper walked up to the ticket counter and paid cash for a one-way ticket on Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, a short hop north to Seattle. He gave his name as Dan Cooper, a name later misreported by a journalist as D.B. Cooper, and that error stuck. Witnesses would later describe him as a white male, around 40 years old, with brown hair and brown eyes. He wore a dark suit, either black or brown, a white shirt, a thin black tie, a black raincoat, and brown shoes. He carried a black briefcase and a brown paper bag. He looked like any businessman traveling home for the holiday. He boarded the Boeing 727-100, registration N467 US, and took his seat, 18E, in the last row of the cabin. The flight had 36 passengers and 6 crew members. The cockpit crew, Captain William A. Scott, First Officer William J. Ratatak, and Flight Engineer Harold E. Anderson, prepared for a routine 30-minute hop. The flight attendants were Alice Hancock, Tina Mucklow, and Florence Schaffner. At 14:50 Pacific Standard Time, Flight 305 lifted off from Portland. For the first few minutes, everything was normal. Then, shortly after takeoff, Cooper did something that would change the course of aviation history. He folded a piece of paper and handed it to flight attendant Florence Schaffner. She thought it might be a phone number or a flirtatious note. Passengers sometimes passed such things. She tucked it into her pocket. Cooper leaned in and said quietly, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Schaffner unfolded the paper. In block letters, written with a felt-tipped pen, it read, "Miss, I have a bomb in my briefcase and want you to sit by me." She looked at his briefcase. Cooper had opened it just enough for her to see what was inside. A large cylindrical battery, wires, and 2 rows of 4 red cylinders that looked like dynamite. He closed the case. Schaffner did as she was told. She sat down next to him, and he dictated his demands. She wrote them on another piece of paper and carried it up to the cockpit. Captain Scott read the demands and immediately began a series of communications that would set a long, strange chain of events into motion. The situation escalated quickly, but quietly. Captain Scott told Schaffner to stay in the cockpit and take notes. The crew relayed Cooper's demands to Northwest's Operations Center in Minnesota. The ransom was to be $200,000, the equivalent of about $1.6 million in 2025, delivered in a backpack by 17 watts. He also wanted 4 parachutes, 2 main chutes and 2 reserve chutes. Flight attendant Tina Mucklow volunteered to sit with Cooper as a liaison. She was the one who would spend the next several hours in his presence. Cooper seemed calm. He ordered a drink, bourbon and 7-Up. He smoked cigarettes. He made small talk. He asked Mucklow where she was from. She said Pennsylvania, but she now lived in Minneapolis. Cooper remarked that Minnesota was beautiful. He asked about her family, but when Mucklow returned the question, asked where he himself was from, Cooper became visibly angry. He refused to answer. He didn't want personal questions. He also showed a surprising familiarity with the area. As the plane circled over Puget Sound, waiting for the ransom to be prepared, Cooper looked out the window and commented, "Looks like Tacoma down there." He knew the geography. Later, when the parachutes were being collected from McCord Air Force Base, he noted that McCord was about a 20-minute drive from SeaTac. He was right. During those 2 hours of circling, Cooper did not act like a desperate criminal. Flight attendant Mucklow later described him as not nervous, rather nice, not cruel or mean. He apologized for the inconvenience. He told her he chose this flight because it was convenient, not because he had anything against the airline. He even offered her a cigarette. There was a brief moment of tension when a passenger in a cowboy hat made eye contact with Cooper, and a witness named George Labissoniere saw Cooper become uncomfortable. But mostly, Cooper just waited. At 17:24, Captain Scott received word that the ransom was ready. The plane landed at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport at 17:46. It taxied to a remote part of the runway, far from the main terminal, illuminated by only partial lighting. The FBI and Seattle police were already coordinating on the ground. Northwest Station Manager in Seattle, Al Lee, was chosen to deliver the money. He wore plain clothes to avoid drawing attention. The ransom was $200,000 in $20 bills, all from the Seattle First National Bank. They were not marked or dyed, but the serial numbers, all starting with the letter L, indicating the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, were photographed on microfilm by the FBI. The money weighed about 19 pounds, 8.5 kilograms. It was packed in a canvas bag, not a backpack as Cooper had requested. This would later provoke a complaint. Flight attendant Mucklow went to retrieve the money from Al Lee. She carried it back to Cooper, who was still seated in the last row. He unzipped the canvas bag, looked inside and nodded. Then he released the passengers. The crew asked if the flight attendants could leave. Cooper agreed. Florence Schaffner asked if she could get her purse from the forward cabin. Cooper said yes. Alice Hancock asked if the flight attendants could all depart. Cooper said yes. One by one, the passengers and cabin crew left the aircraft. Only the 3 cockpit crew members and Tina Mucklow remained. But the escape wasn't simple. Cooper had demanded that the plane be refueled at SeaTac for a long flight to Mexico City with a refueling stop in Reno, Nevada. The fuel truck arrived, but there were complications. A second truck was needed, then a third. The process dragged on. An FAA official tried to approach the plane to speak with Cooper directly. Cooper refused. He grew impatient. He said to Mucklow, "This shouldn't take so long. Let's get this show on the road." During the delay, Cooper turned his attention to the parachutes. He had been given 4, 2 main chutes and 2 reserve chutes. The main chutes had been borrowed from a local stunt pilot. The reserves came from a local parachute school. Cooper used a pocket knife to cut the shroud lines off one of the reserve chutes, then stuffed the canvas bag of money into the empty parachute bag. He tied it up, a makeshift backpack. He also complained that the money had been delivered in a canvas bag instead of a proper backpack. He was meticulous in his preparation. Finally, the refueling was complete. The plane took off again, this time with only Cooper, 3 crew members, and the money. The rear door of the 727-100 was equipped with an air stair that could be lowered in flight. Cooper had already studied the procedure. He ordered the crew to keep the cabin pressure low and the plane at a low altitude, around 10,000 feet, and to set the flaps to a specific position. Then he told them to go to the cockpit and close the door. He was alone in the back. The crew complied. They flew south. They couldn't see what was happening behind them. Somewhere over the rugged, forested terrain of southwest Washington, Cooper lowered the air stair, stepped out into the icy night air, and jumped. The plane continued to fly south for a few minutes before the crew realized Cooper had not returned. They looked back. The air stair was down. The money and the parachutes were gone. Cooper was gone. They notified air traffic control. A massive search began immediately, but here is the twist. Despite the largest manhunt in FBI history at the time, despite hundreds of interviews, despite an investigation that lasted 45 years, no trace of Dan Cooper was ever found. Not his body, not his parachute, not the canvas bag, not the briefcase, not the bomb. Nothing. For years, the case grew cold. Then, in 1980, nearly 9 years after the hijacking, a boy walking along the banks of the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington, found a rotting bundle of cash. It was 3 packets of $20 bills, partially decomposed, held together by rubber bands. The serial numbers matched the ransom money. The total was $5,800, a small fraction of the $200,000. The discovery raised more questions than it answered. How did the money end up there? Was it dropped in the river? Buried and exposed by erosion? Did Cooper land safely only to lose his money? Or did he die in the wilderness and the money was scattered by animals or weather? The FBI tested the bills, examined the area, but no other evidence turned up. The rest of the ransom has never been found. The FBI maintained an active investigation for 45 years. They interviewed thousands of people, chased hundreds of leads, examined dozens of suspects. They considered military parachutists, criminals, disgruntled employees, and even a few people who claimed to be Cooper. None of them matched the evidence. In 2016, the FBI officially suspended its active investigation, stating that there was no credible evidence to pursue. The case remains open, technically unsolved, but no longer actively worked. The identity of Dan Cooper is unknown. His fate is unknown. Whether he survived the jump, landed safely and vanished into an ordinary life, or whether he died in the trees, his bones never found, is a question that has never been answered. The hijacking itself became a cultural legend, inspiring books, movies, and endless speculation. But the facts remain stubbornly few. One thing is certain, the case changed aviation security forever. The hijacking led directly to the installation of metal detectors at airports, mandatory baggage screening, and additional checks for passengers who buy one-way tickets with cash on the same day. Before Dan Cooper, you could walk onto a plane with a briefcase and a note. After him, that became impossible. Let's reconstruct the timeline, minute by minute, witness by witness, from the moment Cooper bought his ticket to the moment he jumped. This is where the contradictions emerge. Phase 1, the ticket purchase. The ledger tells us Cooper bought a one-way ticket at the Portland ticket counter with cash. He gave the name Dan Cooper. We have no specific time for this purchase, but it likely occurred within an hour of departure. The flight left at 14:50, so Cooper was at the airport by early afternoon. Witnesses at the counter likely saw him, but their descriptions are not recorded in the ledger. The only detailed witness descriptions come from the flight crew, so the critical gap begins here. We don't know if anyone saw him arrive, if he had a car, if he was alone. The purchase itself is a solid fact, but it's an island in a sea of unknowns. Phase 2, on board, 14:50-15. The plane takes off. Shortly after, Cooper hands the note to Schaffner. The note is in block letters, written with a felt-tip pen. The bomb description is consistent across all crew accounts. A large cylindrical battery, wires, 2 rows of 4 red cylinders. The bomb is in a black briefcase. No one disputes this. But here is an interesting detail. Schaffner initially thought the note was a phone number. That suggests Cooper was calm and deliberate in his approach. He didn't cause a scene. He let the note speak first. Phase 3, the negotiation, 15/17. The crew relays demands. Cooper asks for $200,000 and 4 parachutes. He also asks for the plane to be refueled upon landing and for the flight attendants to stay. But note, his demands change slightly in sequence. First, he wants the money in a backpack. Then, when the money arrives in a canvas bag, he is annoyed. He adapts by using a parachute bag as a substitute. This shows improvisation. He also requests that the passengers remain seated until the money is delivered, but then he releases them. This flexibility is key. He is not a rigid planner, he is a man who thinks on his feet. Phase 4, the ground stop, 1746-19. The plane lands at SeaTac at 1746. The refueling takes much longer than expected. 3 fuel trucks are needed. An FAA official tries to meet Cooper. Cooper refuses. Here, witness accounts from the cockpit crew and the ground personnel may differ. For instance, Captain Scott might have interpreted Cooper's tone as impatient, but flight attendant Mucklow described him as not nervous. Both can be true. Cooper was calm but wanted the process to move faster. He made the comment, "Let's get this show on the road." That phrase has been repeated in nearly every account. It suggests a man in control, but growing weary of delays. Phase 5, the jump, 19 in Wanda 20. The plane takes off again. Cooper gives specific instructions. Keep the cabin unpressurized, fly at 10,000 feet, set flaps to a certain position. He then lowers the air stair and jumps. The exact time is not recorded. The crew does not see him jump. The only evidence is that the air stair was found lowered and Cooper was gone. The jump location is estimated by flight path and the time the crew realized he was missing. But here is a major contradiction. Some accounts suggest Cooper jumped over the Cascade Mountains, others over the Columbia River Gorge. The discovery of the money in 1980 near the Columbia River supports the latter, but doesn't prove where he landed. Analysis of witness statements. We have 3 primary witnesses from inside the cabin. Flight attendant Tina Mucklow, who spent the most time with Cooper, flight attendant Florence Schaffner, and the cockpit crew, particularly Captain Scott. Their accounts are largely consistent, but there are subtle differences. One difference, Mucklow said Cooper was rather nice and not cruel. Schaffner and the crew might have felt more threatened because they were not sitting with him. Another difference, Cooper's interaction with the passenger in the cowboy hat. Only one witness, George Labissonnière, saw the exchange. Mucklow may not have noticed it. These small discrepancies are natural, but they matter when trying to build a psychological profile. Angle 1, the parachute problem. Cooper demanded 4 parachutes. Why 4? Speculation has ranged from wanting to confuse investigators to intending to take a hostage. But the ledger states that 2 were main chutes and 2 were reserves. He cut the shroud lines off a reserve chute and used it as a bag for the money. He did not use the other reserve. This suggests he had no intention of using the parachutes for escape in a conventional way. He was a solo jumper. The 4 chutes might have been a red herring to make it harder for authorities to track him by forcing them to consider multiple possibilities. But it's also possible he was simply inexperienced and wanted backups. Angle 2, the money recovery. The discovery of $5,800 in 1980 along the Columbia River is a vital clue. The serial numbers match the ransom. The bills were bundled, partially decomposed, and found in a spot that could be reached by water flow or erosion. Some investigators believe Cooper landed safely, retrieved the money, and lost a portion in the river later. Others think he died on impact, and the money was scattered by wildlife or weather over years. The fact that only a tiny fraction was found and no other trace leans toward the theory that Cooper survived and took the rest of the money with him, leaving only a small cache behind by accident or design. Angle 3, the timeline gaps. The biggest gap in the timeline is between the purchase and the jump. We don't know where Cooper went after buying the ticket, whether he lingered in the terminal or if he had an accomplice. The ledger says he carried a brown paper bag. What was in it? Possibly the bomb components, or maybe just his lunch. The bag is never mentioned after the hijacking. Could it have contained something that helped him later? The absence of evidence is itself evidence of a carefully planned operation or simply random chance. The Dan Cooper case endures because it is a perfect mystery. It has a beginning, a middle, and no end. We know what he did. We don't know who he was, where he went, or whether he even survived the night. The FBI investigation lasted 45 years, cost millions, and produced nothing except a few waterlogged bills and a lot of theories. Every year, new people claim to be Cooper or to have solved the puzzle. None have succeeded. There is a lesson in this story about the limits of investigation and the power of a single, well-executed moment. Cooper stepped into the void, and the void never gave him back. He left behind a question mark that has become a monument. The only unsolved hijacking in the history of commercial aviation. And as long as that question remains unanswered, people will keep looking up at the night sky, wondering where he fell. Next time on this channel, a case where the victim was found alive, but the witness was not. Two people saw the same thing. Only one survived to tell the story. And when they did, no one believed them. If this story stayed with you, do me a favor. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new mystery. Leave a like if it gave you chills, and tell me down in the comments what you believe really happened. I'll see you in the next one.